Okay. So we're good? Okay. I think we're good. You guys are good? Okay. Okay, we're going to get started this evening. Good evening and welcome to the November 14th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. We are broadcasting this meeting live on Pacific Coast TV as well as local channel 27. Just a brief thing for etiquette for those that are in person and in Zoom. The Planning Commission Chair will open up the general public comment section of the agenda. At that time, community members are welcome to speak on items that are not listed on this evening's agenda. For the specific items that are listed on the agenda, the public comment opportunities will be discussed during those specific items. 3 minutes of time will be given to each commenter. The in-person commenters will go first and will follow by the Zoom attendees. Those wanting to speak in person, I'll recognize by filling out a green card, which is very helpful to us, and then raising your virtual icon if you're in Zoom. Please make sure to state your name clearly for the record. If you're on Zoom, you can push *6 to raise and unraise your hand and *9 to mute and unmute yourself. We did have some correspondence come in after the agenda was posted, but prior to the start of this meeting, they are posted on our city's agenda. The Planning Commission and staff have all received them. And I will now go ahead and we are doing this in Spanish as well. We have Spanish translation, and I will turn it over to Chair Hernandez to officially start.
Thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we get a roll call? And can we also get somebody here to lock the tables down because it's rolling around?
Oh, yes. We will do that, both of those things. Commissioner Reddick.
Here.
Commissioner Johannes. Here. Commissioner Gorn.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Gossett.
Here.
And Chair Hernandez.
I am present.
All the commissioners are present this evening.
Excellent. The next thing we have on the agenda is the approval of minutes.
Yes, and I can help with that since we have 3 sets of minutes. If we could start with the August 22nd approval.
Does anybody have any comments on the August 22nd minutes?
Commissioner Hernandez and Gorn were absent on that.
So I'm going to recuse myself from the vote, but I'll ask for a motion for approval.
I move we approve those minutes.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes 3-0.
Thank you.
We also have the second set of minutes. You want to help us with that, Bridget?
September 12th, which was our joint study session. Yes, the commissioner that was absent that evening was Gossett.
And I provided one of the comments I thought was out of context, and I confirmed with the speaker, and that's been updated in the new minutes that have been submitted. So I've already submitted my change. Are there any other changes to the minutes? Not seeing any. Can I get a motion?
I move we approve those minutes of September 12th.
Can I get a second?
Sure, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 4-0. Next one, Bridget?
October 24th, which was the last meeting we just had, all commissioners were present.
Does anybody have any amendments or changes to the meeting minutes? Okay. Can I get a motion?
I move we approve the minutes of October 24th.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank you. We're up to date on our minutes.
Woo-woo. All right. As Bridget has said, we're now moving to public comment. For those of you who are members of the public who have an item that you wish to speak on that is not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. Please step to the podium. I believe we have somebody with a green card.
Good evening, commissioners, staff. Nice to see you all. I'm Jimmy Benjamin, and I do have a green card, but I'll have to fill it out and bring it to you later. As we approach the rainy season, I think you will want to pay attention to some of the more vulnerable areas of town, as you did in your thoughtful review of the Poplar area at a recent Planning Commission meeting. I want to also draw your attention to a couple of areas that have recently, well, one area in particular that was recently lost some vegetation without, I believe, the benefit of a coastal development permit. I believe it's a subject of code enforcement right now. And this is an area of the Venice PDD, just north of Wave. There's been vegetation removed from that area. Thank goodness they saved the pampas grass. But it's clear that that area is going to see some wet weather. We have a remaining item in code enforcement. I'm sure it will come out with respect to lands on the south side of the Casa del Mar neighborhood as well. But as the rains come and the atmospheric rivers flow, I'm watching the Keha watercourse with great concern. It has widened in the last couple of, well, less than 2 decades, from a bank-to-bank width of 20 feet in 4 different transects to a width greater than 30 feet. So this is a blink of an eye in geologic time, and it's quite alarming. So I'm looking forward to the resolution of the concerns that all of these areas have. They interplay, since some of those lands once carried water that now flows in the Keha watercourse, and some of the water that's raining in those areas bringing polluted water across Ishas and into the watercourse. I hope that as we get closer to that, we'll have a chance to speak both as staff and as individuals and work through these items before my home and other homes are more seriously threatened than they already are. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? I'm not seeing any online. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. The first item on our agenda, item 1A, I believe requires, well, I understand that 2 of my fellow commissioners have decided to recuse themselves from these items.
Do we need to state why?
Yes.
So I live within 500 feet of the project, so I will recuse myself. Thank you.
I too live within 500 feet of the project, and I too am recusing myself, but I do intend to make a public comment on my personal behalf.
Thank you both. So, Winter, are you going to, it's a pleasant surprise to have you leading one of our items. Please take us away.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hernandez and Commissioners Gorn and Ruddock. It's my pleasure to present on this agenda item tonight. I don't usually present. I am not a planner. I am an attorney, but since this is an appeal of Director Ickes's denial of a couple of modifications to a coastal development permit, we thought it made sense to have someone other than Director Ickes present the agenda item tonight. So I will do my best. If there are questions that are more for a planner, Scott Phillips is here and can hopefully help out if there are questions about the residential design guidelines or other things like that. But I'll go ahead and do the staff presentation and help walk us through the appeal.
1 second before you get started. We're not seeing the presentation on our screens.
Yeah. Oh.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Oops. There we go. Okay, so in the, are you seeing it now?
We
Or you
lost
lost it?
everything.
Oh dear. All right, just give me a thumbs up when you're ready.
I think somebody unplugged a cable.
Hold on, I'm gonna unplug this and plug it back in and see if it'll work.
It's not an echo anymore.
doesn't. Yeah. I don't know what happened.
Very good. Please proceed.
Okay, great. So this is just an overview of the presentation and the process tonight. I'll first present some project background and then go over the scope and nature of the appeal. Then, as we've been doing in the past, if the chair would like to first take public comment, have the public hearing portion. We do have an appellant in this case, and it has been standard practice for appellants to get up to 10 minutes for a presentation. And then we would open it up for other public comment. And then following that, there would be clarifying questions and discussion and deliberation by the Planning Commission. So by way of background, this is an aerial of the project site. It's a single-family home at 225 Valdez. The original project, and I'll get into more of the specifics of the history in a moment, but just wanted to give you kind of a high-level visual of what we're talking about here, was a renovation and addition of this single-family home. You can see two grade areas that were the two addition pieces. And at issue tonight is really just the rear terrace addition on the back there. And this is the east elevation. There have been a number of different sets of plans for the renovations and the addition, so don't pay too much attention to the details. We'll get into that later. This is more just to show a different angle on the particular part of the addition we're talking about, which is that rear second-story terrace area where you see the outline of the human being. And there's a blue box over the skylights on that rear terrace addition, which is really just to remind us that the skylights that are shown in this rendering were not part of the approved CDP, and we're going to be talking about that blue box area a little bit later, but just wanted to make sure no one was misinformed about that. And this is the rear elevation. And again, it's really just to show that the second-story terrace area, it is open to the elements. You can see the openings in the back. Actually, I didn't really point that out. You can see here, too, the openings through the side. So it's partially enclosed, but those aren't windows. That's open to the outside. Okay, and so as I mentioned already, even though there were kind of many pieces and elements of the original project approval, the remodel and the addition, at issue tonight are really just two elements, and they are the location of the roof opening, which is shown in green on this slide, and the location of the wall opening, which is shown in blue on this slide. Okay, so I'll briefly go through the history, the sort of permit history of this project. In April 2021, the original coastal development permit was approved by Director Ickes. The building permit was issued in August 2021. And the original approval, as we'll see in this next slide here, for the roof opening that we're going to be talking about, the original approval actually had something that is called a ridged skylight, and I'll show you the image of that in a moment. In March of 2022, staff approved a change to that roof opening so that it could be either the ridged skylight or just a roof opening, and I'll show you that as well in a second. So this is the original approval, the plan with the ridged skylight, which you can see here. And then this was the March 2022 revised building permit, which replaced the ridged skylight with a roof opening. And the opening was approved as an alternative way to provide articulation, light, and openness to the design of that rear addition and the second-story terrace. And you'll hear those terms come up again in a little bit here. So after those two are the original approval and then the revised building permit, in September 2022, the applicant requested a number of additional minor modifications to the CDP. Most of these modifications really don't have anything to do with the appeal tonight. There was a request for an exterior spiral staircase. There were requests for additional skylights, not on that rear terrace, but on the original house. There were a number of other changes that Director Ickes approved. However, there was at least one relevant requested modification that Director Ickes did not approve, and that was a request to change that roof opening to 4 sort of, I would call them standard skylights. So that was requested in September 2022, and Director Ickes denied that request for a modification and explained that the original approval with the ridged skylight as well as the second approval with the roof opening were designed to comply with residential design guidelines related to articulation, light, and openness, and that in Director Ickes' opinion, the standard skylights didn't provide those same design benefits. And so she denied that request and noted that the terrace roof shall be finished with either a ridged skylight system as approved in the CDP and the original version of the approved building permit plans, or with a roof opening as approved with the March 2022 building permit plan revision. The applicant did not appeal that denial. However, the applicant did request some additional modifications to that rear terrace section of the project and proposed a new design for that rear terrace that would enclose some of it entirely, making it what we call conditioned space, and then leave the back portion more open. And I have some. So this was that proposal subsequent to the September minor modifications. The director considered this change to still be a minor modification, but due to the some significant public interest in the project, brought this to the Planning Commission for your consideration last November. So this was the minor modification that the Commission considered on November 22nd, 2022. And I do want to note there was an error in the staff report for tonight. We referred to this, we said that we had considered this a major modification. In fact, we considered it minor, but Director Ickes exercised her discretion to bring it to you, given the public interest in the matter. So last November, as you may remember, the Planning Commission approved this modification, but with some conditions that were recommended by staff, including shortening up the enclosed condition space and maintaining more openness in the back. So you'll see on the slide here, that red line shows that modification of kind of pulling that wall back a few feet to the south. There was an appeal that was filed of and that should say minor modification, of the CDP. Following that appeal, the applicant indicated that they actually didn't want to proceed with the new plans, that they would go back to the design as approved previously. That mooted out the appeal, essentially, and kind of wiped out that decision, if you would. And then in January, staff provided the applicant with a letter indicating the remaining schedule and milestones that needed to be completed in order to complete the project in a timely fashion. In August of this year, the applicant requested several additional modifications to the CDP. These are going to be the subject of the appeal tonight. And Director Ickes denied those modifications, stating her opinion that the modifications were less consistent with the residential design guidelines than what had been previously approved. And the applicant appealed that denial here to you tonight. Okay, so that brings us to the appeal tonight. The requested modifications that are before you tonight, there are two of them. One is a change to the roof opening, and I'll show you some visuals in a minute here. But basically, the applicant requested that the roof opening be rotated 90 degrees, which will result in the opening being just 6 feet wide instead of 8 feet wide, which is the prior approval. And there was also a request to shift the wall openings to the north. And I'll show you those here. So again, this is the current approval. The green shows the roof opening area, and the blue shows the wall opening. And this is the requested modification that was denied by the director and is before you tonight. So you can see it's a little bit hard to really compare because it's a little bit scaled differently, but that the green is slightly narrower, 6 feet instead of 8 feet, and then the blue wall openings are shifted to the north instead of being slightly more centered there in the wall. Staff's recommendation is to deny the appeal and uphold the director's decision. The director's decision considered consistency with the residential design guidelines, which I will show you a couple of slides with those in a second here. It also considered kind of the whole of the design and the cumulative impact of the multiple small changes that this project has gone through. And the main issues from a design standpoint, in staff's opinion, have to do with articulation, openness, symmetry, and balance of the design, which are affected by the proposed modifications. So there were 4 design guidelines that were cited in the staff report. The first is 3-4, which recommends to modulate building forms and mass to create openings for light and ventilation while minimizing shadowing impacts on neighboring properties. As the staff report noted, the rotated roof opening would bring the design into less compliance with this guideline because it would reduce that opening by 25% and reduce the modulating of the building form and mass. The next guideline is 3-19, which is articulate mass and elements on the home's exterior in a manner that is compatible with the overall architectural style of the home. In particular, staff has highlighted the shifted wall openings diminish the compatibility with the architectural intent of the design of the second-story terrace, which, as initially presented, included symmetrical elements, and this would be not symmetrical. Guideline 3-20, provide an inset, offset, or plane change on long walls of greater than 25 feet in length. And the compliance with this guideline is dependent on both the roof openings and the wall openings to establish some change in what would otherwise be a very long wall plane in the north-south direction. So any reduction in openings along this plane results in reduced conformance. And then policy 3-22, align first and second floor windows to achieve a vertical symmetry along facades. This project was constructed, this came up last year when we talked about it, with an additional 1.5-foot wall length that threw off some of the symmetry on the first floor, but the approved modifications at least maintained the symmetry on the upper floor with respect to the architectural columns and wall openings, and the proposed modifications would further diminish the remaining vertical symmetry. So that is it for my presentation. So next up, I would recommend the appellant's presentation, public comment, and then move on to Planning Commission questions, discussion, and deliberation.
Thank you, Winter. Appreciate that. Does the appellant, hi Ludwig, it's been a while. Does the appellant have a presentation they'd like to put before us?
We're loading the file.
And you're going to need to make sure the microphone is close enough where it can pick up your voice. I know it's a little awkward.
Can you hear me? Is that good? Is it on? Hi, I'm Lori Romero Ellingson, owners, and Russell Ellingson, owners of 225 Valdez. I haven't seen this letter before. Okay. Did you want to? Okay, there you go.
I apologize, we're not seeing the presentation. Thank you. We can see it. Bridget, can you reset that?
Yes. Just let me know when I'm
Go ahead.
here.
It's
Okay.
fine.
All right. So basically, most of our remodel has been complete except for the second-story terrace that is in question right now. I'm happy that Winter brought up the previous Planning Commission meeting that we had in the past and bringing forth some of the design guidelines, because I do have the design guidelines, and they did come with pictures as to what each one was referring to, and they do not refer to skylights, openings, or roofs with the 25 feet. So I brought that just in case you wanted to see for yourself the different design guidelines. This, to me, seems quite, and I'm just doing a little overview, a little ridiculous on behalf, because these changes are so minor. They don't affect anyone. And they just seem spiteful, honestly. So we, as the property owners, have abided by all the city's requests. We provided lists, dates, letters. We are following the guidelines. We have been harassed in the last 2 years. And so we decided to take a break so we can kind of catch our breath and just leave the second story until we got the approval to move forward from the city. I'm going to go on to the second page here. On February 24th, 2023, we requested for those to have 4 skylights on our second story terrace. In our planning commission on 11/22, that one item was overlooked because we went into the unconditional space. So it was on that agenda to go over that, but that meeting, if you all remember, kind of went on until like 11 o'clock at night, and one of the commissioners were sick. So I would hope that we can reconsider these 4 skylights. Again, no design guideline refers to skylights, and they should be compatible. No standard skylights affects any resident at all, unless they've climbed up on a ladder and are looking at a roof. We got denied for this approval, and I provided appendices to this, but that'll go on. So I'm hoping, so it's my request, we can switch to the next slide, that the Planning Commission approved 4 skylights on the terrace roof, and our shifted opening that Winter presented in blue be shifted to the edge, so we all can, not just our family, but their family would have a better ocean view and not to our west neighbors. If for some reason our 4 skylights are denied, we are hoping to just have the opening that has been approved. It would be the same dimensions, but just rotated 90 degrees. So one of the arguments is saying that it is now from 8 feet to 6 feet. Yes, but the west and east opening has now gained that 2 feet footage. So it's just rotated. The dimensions are exactly the same. So we're not shortening anything. And actually, those are the only 2 things that we wanted to shift a little to the north, the opening, just so when we open the door, we don't have rain flooding on us, that we have this little kind of breakaway. So it's just to shift the opening, which has been, which would be aesthetically better and feel less unbalanced from the inside view. And again, no one should have, and the roof does not affect anyone. Also, if you can flip to, I'm sorry, the next slide, I apologize. And this is what I was talking about. The opening remains the same. All dimensions remain the same. The shift is of the opening on the east and west wall would just be to be a greater view of the ocean view. It might look off-centered here aesthetically, but inside it looks great. And then all of the other openings are shifted to the very edge. If you can flip to the next slide. You can see this is a 360 view of our addition. The east side, the north side, and the west side. The east side is the first, the north side is the middle, and the west side is the back. You can go to the next slide. There does not appear to be any legitimate reason for denying or opposing these requested changes. We adhere to all residential design guidelines. There's no guidelines that refer to roof openings, skylights, or shifted openings. I don't understand how anybody could oppose this as it affects no one. Again, the changes are very minor. We're not changing dimensions. I do have things that were referred to by Winter for Jill Ekus. And on the first one, and I can bring this up, for the design guidelines, there are pictures as to what it's referring to and not to any roof openings on this. Can I just bring this up so you guys can look that? Okay. So if you can see 3.4 has nothing to do with skylights. The roof was opened and the structure indents from the original house line. Additionally, to refute this point, the proposal is to add 4 skylights to create lighting. The ridge skylight is no different from the proposed skylights on ventilation. In either case, light is added and the roof does not affect or impact neighboring properties. If anything, it can be an argument that the ridge skylight could add shadow to the neighboring east property. I forget the other. We had 320.
319, 320, and 322.
Let's say 319, 320, and what was the other one? I'm sorry. 322.
322.
Okay. I don't have 319 on my notes, I'm sorry, but 320 is about changing on the long walls greater than 25 feet in length. This does not apply to the roof line, and if it did, there is articulation within 5 feet as they kind of shift. I don't think I have 322 either. I would need to borrow the design guidelines to kind of read it down.
Align first and second floor windows to achieve a vertical symmetry along facades.
We're not talking about any windows here. There's no windows associated with it. And then 321, provide a prominent entry feature. No, was that my notes? 319. I apologize. Articulate mass and elements on the home's exterior in a manner that is compatible with the overall textural structure of the home. Again, this has a picture depicting of what this means, and it has nothing to do with that back. So I'm confused with the design guidelines that we are not meeting. I don't want to get lost into other people's statements about red tagging and things like that. I think Joe Butcher could speak to that. We did nothing. And every time I work from home, I've left on 3 occasions, and on those 3 occasions, calls have come in for an inspector to inspect our home. There's been no wrongdoing. We have followed every instruction. We actually, that morning that we had somebody call, we called for an inspection for the next day so they can see our work that we were doing. Prior to someone calling our house, we had offered this appeal. So there is nowhere in question that we did not do the right thing. I think that's all I have, but I would request to come back up here if questions are needed or if clarifications are needed as well.
We're happy to accommodate that if it's required. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to other public, and thank you for your presentation. I'm going to open it up to other public comment. I have 3 comment cards from the same household. So I'm going to ask Ilan Nagengast to speak first. It's also nice to see you. It's been a few years as well.
Good evening, planning commissioners, city staff, and others. I'm Elin Nagengast, and I live at 229 Valdez Avenue. It is all very confusing to me to understand how someone can build something that is not approved. My dad tells me there's a public process to work things out, and yeah, I hope, as my dad tells me, everyone will do the right thing. I leave the rest of my allotted time to my dad, Paul Nagengast.
Thank you. Paul Nageng, can I get Hazel Joannis?
Good evening, planning commissioners. I'm speaking on my own behalf, my personal preference here on my own behalf. Because my real property boundary is within the 500 feet of 225 Valdez, I'm disclosing this real property interest. I've recused myself from participating in this decision, and I'm acting as a member of the general public. It's been a long time since this project has been approved, and I'm hoping that the commission can make the correct and right decision for the applicant and for the neighborhood as well. I hope tonight will be the end of this project and that the project can move forward to completion. And I reserve the rest of my time to Paul Nagengast.
Paul, you have 3 minutes, please.
Good evening, Planning Commission Chair, remaining commissioners, city staff, and interested community members. I am Paul Nagengast. I live at 229 Valdez Avenue. We are the neighbors immediately east of this project. The staff report indicates that the planning director made her decision because the plans did not meet the residential design guidelines. As the Planning Commission needs to remember, residential design guidelines were utilized to develop project plans in order to make findings to approve the coastal development permit as part of PDP 21-010. The residential design guidelines should not be excused subsequent to constructing an illegal structure because someone did not construct according to an approved permit. To determine residential design guidelines are now arbitrary and capricious on an illegal structure would be rewarding bad behavior and sending a terrible message to the community. There would no longer be that trust that neighbors, community, and public have in the city to do the right thing throughout the planning, building, and construction process to assure what is approved is what is built. The staff report did not clearly indicate until the second page of the report 225 Valdez is involved in code enforcement action by the city since May 2022. The more formal code enforcement action initiated by the city by letter dated January 24, 23 required 225 Valdez to provide scheduling to bring their project into approved project compliance. While I would have desired this formal approach by the city have taken place in May of 2022, the city was very clear in the January 23 letter to 225 their expectations for 225 Valdez to bring their project into approved project compliance. As part of this code enforcement action, the property was issued a citation on July 28, 2023 due to a violation of the City of Half Moon Bay Municipal Code. Specifically, the second-story addition does not adhere to the original approved plan set and are a violation of the conditions of approval. Any violation of the City Municipal Code also constitutes a public nuisance. I've always been very clear that any information provided to the city regarding activities at 225 Valdez is questioning whether or not permits have been issued or if the work is following approved permits. I'm only an interested individual trying to determine if my expectation of what is being built or activity commenced is based on prior city approvals or unapproved work. The city makes the determinations to whether permits are required, whether permits have been properly acquired, and if construction is in conformance with the approved permits. And yes, I have found over the course of this project there were various public right-of-way permits not obtained as well as non-approved construction occurring. If the city staff shares with 225 Valdez that I have inquired about the project or have asked about permitting responsibilities or what process the city is following, then so it goes, but does not relieve 225 Valdez from obtaining the necessary permits. I do not issue permits, the city issues permits and enforces the process. If 225 Valdez needs a permit or they are in non-compliance of an existing permit, then it is the city's responsibility to advise 225 Valdez Avenue. It is always interesting to me that others can know what is best for me without asking me what is best for me. I have and I continue to ask the city to follow approved processes to ensure that I know what is and what will be constructed. The residential design guidelines as used for the approvals for this project ensure our view of the finished project is what the residential design guidelines requires. If the residential design guidelines are not used subsequent to illegal construction, then remove these residential design guidelines from all your processes. In conclusion, over the course of the past year, I have heard parties and construction noise from the enclosed illegal structure. I have seen contractors and city building staff going over to 225 Valdez. I can't help it to see it or hear it. I live next door. I've also recently had San Mateo County Mosquito Vector Control District personnel come over to our home to discuss the activity of roof rats eating the citrus skins of our lemon tree. The county vector control officer found no evidence of nesting on our property, but it was noticed there are piles of construction debris and construction materials near our tree that have been laying around on 225 Valdez property for over 1 year. Whether or not that could provide sufficient habitat for the rodents was not determined. But the point is, these construction and debris piles have been laying on the property undisturbed for over a year. Therefore, it is necessary to complete this project in accordance with the currently approved plans as indicated in the staff report. I am in agreement with staff's recommendation to deny 225 Valdez appeal of the planning director's decision in accordance with the findings of the accompanying resolution to the staff report and for staff to continue with the current code enforcement action to finish this project. Thank you.
Do we have any more public comments from folks in the audience? I see that a member of the public, former Mayor Mike Farrar, has raised his hand. If you could open it up to Mike, please.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman Hernandez and Planning Commissioner. There's a bit of reading on this, and I've read it all, including the attorney brought by the neighbors, a well-respected attorney that used to be the attorney from Menlo Park. There is also, of course, your own very respected attorney who supports the planning director's denial. Mr. Nagengast brought up an awful lot of issues, some of which may not be part of the denial, but they do kind of indicate what puts the neighbors on edge. And I did read the appellant applicant's plea, and in part of that plea, they made an issue of $4,041 in appeal costs. When I look at what's involved here, I have to wonder why anyone would spend that kind of money on this kind of an appeal. I think what's happening here is there's considerable aggravation on the part of the neighbors, which I guess is mutual with the applicant. But I highly recommend that you follow the staff recommendation, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. I don't see any other attendees who've raised their hand virtually, and I don't see anybody who has raised their hand in present, in their corporeal form. So I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion and clarifying questions. Would one of you like to start?
I do have one question, which I believe is a clarifying question. Excuse me. So residential design guideline 3-19 is a little less specific than most of these guidelines. It talks about compatibility with the overall architectural style of the house. I'd appreciate hearing from staff a little more on how they analyze what the appeal asks for in light of that.
Just before staff starts, I'd like to pile on to that point, specifically on 3.4 by I think it was modulating the construction. I'd like to address the long plane, and the question of windows versus openings was raised on symmetry for 322, so I would like staff to respond to the questions that were raised there from a design perspective, if they could. To be clear, help us understand why, what is the specific thinking that goes into why something is in conformance or not in conformance with these 4 items in particular?
Yes, I'd be happy to provide some clarification, and thank you for the questions. So regarding guideline 319, this really has to do with, we end up referencing this quite a bit with additions. And for example, we have an applicant come in that wants to do an addition. We utilize this guideline to make sure that the addition is compatible with the rest of the house, that it doesn't look like an addition. So, yeah, specifically with the compatible with the overall architectural style of the home. So, for example, we may ask an applicant, hey, you've got one type of siding and material on the existing house. You want to do something different on the addition. Guideline 319 requires the addition to be compatible with the existing house. So, and I think that has some applicability to this particular project. As far as 3-4.
Before you move on, could you provide something specific to 319, or are you going to go through, I mean, because what I understand is there's 4 specific elements that this project doesn't pass muster with, doesn't meet the guidelines. And so could you speak to what's specifically or generally there from a design perspective that's problematic?
Yeah, I think it's a, it does note in the staff report about 319 and that the second story addition does have some, it's questionable whether it's compatible with the rest of the house. So.
I'm sorry, Scott, but if I may, through the chair, I understand your example of different siding on a house and an addition, but the specifics of the location of these elements that the applicants are interested in, I'm hoping to hear why the specifics of the change in that would be detrimental to the otherwise existing compatibility with the architectural style.
Okay, so we just flipped to a slide in the presentation that provides some background, and it's more about the shift in the wall opening that reduces the compatibility and substantial conformance with guideline 319. So, and really and truly, it's, there is some gray area here, that guidelines are more, it's more about substantial conformance than it is compliance. So, I think
Does it diminish compatibility because it reduces the symmetrical elements? Is that what this is trying to say?
Are we on here?
Yeah.
Through the
Please.
chair, I'm going to pop in if that's all right with you.
I think that'd be helpful.
I've tried to maintain appropriate separation from this, but I would like to explain the reasoning. This project was a previous planner's project who's no longer with the city, and so that I've had to take it over because of workload. So other staff members have kept up with it, but they might not know all of the things that were coming out of my head and getting popped into your staff report and into these findings. So specific to 319, I was, in this case, really studying the design integrity of the addition, which initially was very strong. It was very open. It was quite beautiful, and it has been kind of nipped away at over time. And so the overall compatibility of the style was almost born around that addition, not just with the house. And the shift of the 1 point, I think it was 1.5 foot that was elongated with the footprint, actually threw it off, and it made it harder to keep that look and feel from the original approval, which relied on a lot of articulation elements, really striking architectural features to support that, because it is a long wall line. So this is something that's been of concern for neighbors. I hope that helps, but I was really looking at the house, the addition, how they work together, and then how the addition had evolved over time.
Thank you. Since you've come up here, can you talk about how the long plane on 320 is pulled into your concerns on this design?
Sure. So this wall plane is pretty long on the east side of the house, and to meet this design guideline, or to suggest that this design meets it, again, we relied on a significant amount of openness in the upper floor of the structure in particular. We actually did not require much on the ground floor. It's just a long wall line. But that included architectural columns, wall openings centered between those columns, and that significant roof feature, which provides a lot of articulation. I know that there's been statements about what is and isn't included in the design guidelines. As you know, we're going to talk about this in your next item, but the design guidelines are a should document. They guide us, and we have to make some interpretations about how we're going to implement them. Without the roof articulation, we're getting really pretty flat. So that's the whole issue of the wall plane.
And I'm not an architect, but I understand that a window doesn't need to have glass to be a window.
So that was, of course, our interpretation, that the openings read as windows, certainly, and that's how we were working with those different elements of the upper floor.
Great.
I hope that explains.
I think that answers all the questions I have. Steve?
Thank you, Director Egas.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pull it back to the Planning Commission for discussion. Who'd like to start?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sad to sit here and feel the negative energy and stress and pain that exists around this, as we've seen in earlier meetings. And I empathize with the applicants and the neighbors and regret that it had to go through it with this project, but this happens in life sometimes. In retrospect, I think, well, I won't say anything more about that, but my feelings go out to everybody involved. I think in this case, what Director Ekus and Attorney King and Scott have articulated about the residential design guidelines makes great sense. You know, the guidelines call for sophisticated and experienced judgment sometimes, and you can have fine lines here, but I believe that the judgment that staff has exercised in denying this appeal makes sense to me, and I'd be in favor of upholding the denial.
Commissioner Gordon?
I guess the phrase that stuck with me is these changes are so minor. And, you know, I've now watched this project over a long period of time and watched a terrace turn into a room. Like it has gone from small change to small change to small change to small change to, I don't consider this to be minor, but I think if it is so minor, then why is it before the Planning Commission again? If it's really just two little things, two little, like, oh, I just want this moved and that moved, like, I don't really understand why that rises to the level of an appeal to the Planning Commission. And I have a really hard time, given how much the city has done and how much the city has cooperated and helped and tried to figure out ways to make it work, that we're coming back here again over, you know, more minor modifications. I'm kind of honestly stunned that it's before the Planning Commission again. So that's, I didn't really talk to you. I'm not really talking to you. So I applaud the city for how it has behaved in handling this issue. It has been a tough issue. I think everyone involved, from City Council to Planning Commission to city staff, has really tried to make it work for everyone. And so I have a really hard time with it coming back again. So I would vote for, what, is it approval of denial? Mm-hmm. Approval of denial. Thank you.
So this is a difficult situation, and I've been through the design process with your architect on my project here in Half Moon Bay, and I know that it can sometimes be a certain amount of doubt or uncertainty that can happen in the process. But I think over the last 10 years, we've made a lot of changes to make it more clear. And I know staff has, from my experience, usually the best intent in terms of trying to make projects move forward. I understand there have been issues. They do sort of give a perspective, but it's not, the issues and the enforcement things aren't really what's primarily in question here. It's more of, does this, when we look at the whole of the project and the changes that have been made, and we look at what's laid out in the residential design guidelines, which are a relatively recent addition to the city's history, I think, and again, these are not prescriptive rules as laid out in the document. They are guidelines that allow us to solve for the 98% use case, and they require the judgment of planning professionals and architects who may have good faith disagreements about whether or not something conforms. And I think if it was one minor issue, I might be inclined to see it more from the appellate's perspective, but given the 4 items in question, and I had a hand in drafting and editing the design guidelines, so I'm very familiar with them. I think the overall body of work says that this is something that I would have a hard time arguing is compatible with the residential design guidelines as laid out in their entirety. There may be things we can quibble about, but I think you've got a lovely project, and just from a person who walks around Half Moon Bay gawking at houses, I think in the long term, the project that you're going to have completed may feel a little uncomfortable on the inside, but on the outside, it looks much stronger from a design perspective, and I hope it adds value to your house. I'd like to get a motion.
I move we pass the resolution at hand, which upholds the Community Development Director's denial of the appeal in this case.
Excuse me, through the chair. I just wanted to clarify, we don't actually have a resolution here. This is just a motion and a vote. So if you're looking for sort of the technical language, you might deny the appeal and uphold the director's decision.
Oh, we have a resolution.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, great. I take it back. I didn't see it in the...
That is a rare first.
Okay.
Put it in with the stuff.
Okay. All right. I take it back. We do have a resolution.
I just wanted to interrupt just briefly.
Sorry.
And the reason is because you said I was able to come back and answer.
You first of all, could you raise your hand
Sorry.
and ask for, just as a matter of, I will give you 2 minutes to, if you'd like to. Go ahead. I'm opening public comment.
Thank you. I'm disappointed, obviously, because this is such a minor change. We've created several designs for this project to appease our neighbors. We've worked with the city on changing based on all of their recommendations. Do this, do that, do this, do that. We did. We provided PDFs, everything what they've asked. I completely understand for you to say, because we're coming here a second time to request rotations, no change in dimensions, but this is a violation of our property rights. I hope you all know that, and this is on record, and there is nothing that will continue to that next process, because we are going through the stages of making sure that we are hitting all the marks in order to get in front of a judge. So a rotation of an opening, these guidelines aren't say nothing and do not comply with an opening to a roof, skylights. And so I hear that you are going to deny, and that's great, but this will just go on to the next stage.
Thank you. Before we continue with the motion, I'd like to, for the record, ask for clarification from our attorney. What body in Half Moon Bay has ultimate oversight over architecture? What bodies in Half Moon Bay have ultimate oversight over architectural design?
Well, there's the Community Development Director, the Planning Commission, and the City Council.
And so if somebody disagrees with the planning commissioner, or if there's a project before us that she's not made a decision on, we are the body that is responsible for interpreting and enforcing the residential design guidelines as well as the architectural rules that we have in place and the codes that we have in place for the city. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the city council's job is to either determine whether to review and agree with appeals or deny appeals, but they're not getting into planning decisions or architectural design as a matter of general issues?
Not as a matter of course, but they do hear appeals from decisions by the Planning Commission.
Very good, thank you. So I'd like to make it clear for the public record that this project is not in conformance with the residential design guidelines. And I'd like to amend the denial to include the statement from the Planning Commission that the project, as appealed, does not conform with the residential design guidelines. Can I get a second to amend that?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion. I'd like to say we have a motion before us that I've amended. Can we get a vote on this item?
We're okay with that motion.
Yes, I retract my previous erroneous statement.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Reddick,
Yes.
Commissioner Gorn,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes.
Motion approved 3-0.
Thank you. Okay. Item 1A is closed, and we are moving on to the next item on the agenda.
Are other commissioners joining us for the...
Yes, I believe so.
I wonder if we could take a 2-minute break.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
We'll come back at 8:20. Planning Commission meeting. We have the second item on our agenda. Actually, Planning Commission business, and we have a Planning Commission update on processing amendments to coastal development permits. We have a staff report.
Yes,
Presentation.
thank you, Chair and Commissioners. So Scott and I are going to give you an update on what we've been doing since about a year ago when we discussed the very interesting and sometimes challenging topic of amending coastal development permits. Go ahead and kick it off. This is just an update. It's not a public hearing, but we are looking for your feedback and hoping to almost be in conversation mode by the end of this presentation. Next slide. Thank you. So for background, we talked about this about a year ago. There was concern about how to issue such amendments. There are conditions of approval that we rely on, and frankly that the Coastal Commission has similar conditions in their permits, and I think that's kind of the artifact of how that got into the city's conditions. And it's important to have some ability to make some amendments if need be as you move along. Things happen with projects, as we know. And so we dug in a bit deeper and we made recommendations about things that we could do. We also looked at suggestions that were submitted to the city, and then we've done a few other things that just didn't come up a year ago that we thought you should know about. Okay. All right, so the primary topics tonight of things that are in effect now, we've worked hard to memorialize the process. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then Scott, who is our senior planner, who's really overseen the current planning function, including our building staff, will talk to you about the nuts and bolts of what we're doing with public notice and some of the oversight of coastal development permits and building permits. So for memorializing the process, we prepared a lot of information for you about a year ago and tried to kind of get different categories of coastal development permit amendments so that we could have thresholds established. Admittedly, they're not going to be perfect, but we're trying to be clear that there's these ministerial changes that would never be subject to a coastal development permit review, and they need to be allowed and kind of flow through the process, provided that they don't poke a hole in anything that has to do with the CDP. And then the topic of minor versus major, we really dug into that. And the attachment to your memo is an update of the document, or really an excerpt of the staff report from a year ago. And we'd like to think of it as a working document. We're prepared to gussy it up a little bit more because we want to put it on the website. And this is really zoning code interpretations. They're not unusual. We have a number of code sections that make us absolutely crazy, and we have written up how we interpret those codes, and we keep those in a file that we refer to because we're trying to maintain consistency and not go sideways on precedents. So this is not unusual. I've done this as a zoning administrator in other cities. This is very standard. Now, you don't want to have so many interpretations that you're diminishing the code. I want to reassure you that's not something that we're doing. But that said, we also have put up on our website other interpretations that have been made in the past. For example, the story pole policy. That's not in your code. That's a side policy that council actually oversaw that one, I believe. And there were a couple others that you thought of. Remind me.
Well, included with the story pole policy, there's a a definition of what's a gable and a dormer in relation to the maximum building envelope, which is certainly helpful for our applicants. We have a few others. I'm trying to think.
That's good. Okay, so moving on to more of the nuts and bolts of what staff does.
So over the course of the past year or so, we have implemented some additional measures to notify the community of projects moving forward. And site posting, we have basically several times that we post a site anytime an application is submitted. Once when the application is initially submitted, and then once we actually arrive on a date for either director hearing, planning commission, or city council, we'll post the site again. And our site postings have become a little more dynamic. We're including a beneficial image out of the plans. Obviously, we can't eliminate all the sheets in the plans, but we try and pick one that mostly represents the project for neighbors and people walking by they can see. I tried to find a photograph to include in the presentation, but this is one that had, that was readily available. With our architectural advisory committee, we're not required to provide any noticing, but we have been doing courtesy notices, especially for projects that where we feel that neighbors may be interested in. Especially if we had received comments when the application was submitted, we'll do a courtesy notice. Maybe it's just to 100 feet and post the site, but just to notify folks of the Architectural Advisory Committee meetings. For bigger projects, we're also publishing meeting dates in our city e-news, as well as other social media sources. And then Constant Contacts. We also send out notices via email through Constant Contacts.
And Scott, I'm just going to note that the color coding here for the new, which is in green, those are things that we've been doing most specifically related to what we talked about a year ago. If it's blue and says recent, these are things that we've been doing for longer, a longer period of time that we had been working on. And they might not have come up in our discussion. And then if there's no comment about it, it's just something that we've been doing it's just our practice, but we're noting it because we think it's of interest to you.
So a little bit about coastal development permit oversight. We have made some changes to our standard conditions of approval. One of them being the reference to our city engineer for any changes related to impervious surface and not an imperious surface. I think there was a typo in there, so we have fixed that one. So check that off the list. And then also, the whole process, I think, this comes up fairly often, especially if we have a new applicant. What do I need to do for my addition? What are the steps that I need to go through? And there is this sort of two-step process that most of the time there's a coastal development permit involved. If there's any sort of substantial construction, that's a lot of times the first step. And then the second step is for folks to submit for a building permit. But the planners are tasked with what's called a compliance check. So we do end up spending quite a bit of time making sure that the building permit plans that are submitted conform to the plans that are, like approved by the Planning Commission. So that's through during the building permit plan check process. So that's really the primary task of the planners, and it may require some collaboration with engineering staff, and if there is a subtle change that's taken place to, for example, the impervious surface or other changes, we may have to reach out to the fire district, and there is some collaboration that takes place during the building permit plan check process. Now, recently we onboarded a new building official at the city. So that's been pretty exciting, and we're very excited to have him on board, Keith Weiner. And he's had the opportunity to work at several other cities in the peninsula, and we're really excited to have him. And he's actually, it seems like every week he brings up ideas that he's implemented in other cities, and just kind of giving a fresh perspective to our building division. So that's pretty exciting. As far as inspections, now historically the project planner will always do a final inspection for any new construction. We have started to do more than that. We're doing sort of interim site inspections just to make sure that everything is going okay. And then we're also in the process of implementing a inspection prior to pouring foundations, where the planner will actually go and sign off on the job card before the cement trucks show up on site, just to help out our inspection staff, to flag any concerns, especially if there was some, specific item that came up during the planning review process. So lots of changes, and we're always striving to make the process smoother and more efficient.
Thanks, Scott. I also want to give you a plug for the pre-construction meetings, which was on the previous slide. This is something that was Scott's idea some time ago. I can't remember which project got us doing this. It was happening kind of casually, but now it's very deliberate, and you'll see that condition in conditions of approval that come to you. All right, so I wanted to go over some additional potential improvements, and a few of these came in at a request of one of our speakers tonight, and we want to be really responsive and suggest some ways to incorporate these ideas. So first of all, if you can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about the residential design guidelines again. So the request here was to require strict conformance with those guidelines for any amendment to a coastal development permit. And we absolutely appreciate that. And of course, the Planning Commission and staff, I think we all try to make sure they're being implemented. We have to be careful because in some cases they can't be applied, for example, to some existing structures. And we really wanted to have a little more flexibility around that. But instead of specifically requiring that in our guidance document, we think it's important to elevate how important they are with our applicants. Our applicants and their architects can get really, and they should, they're really focused on the code. They're absolutely looking at their setbacks, their FAR, and the building envelope can probably take most of their time to meet that. And we need to elevate the design guidelines in the application process before the plans come in. And that's something that I would like a little more time with staff to work on, and we can update you about ideas for that. It does come up for new homes because I believe our Measure D has a little bit of a relationship to, conforming to the code generally. But of course, the design guidelines because they are a should document, some folks aren't quite as concerned about them as maybe they should be. So we'll let you know what is making sense with that. All right. This one, I really liked this suggestion. Staff really appreciates this. After the fact revisions disqualified as minor, even if they are. We're not talking about those ministerial changes like going from one type of window to another one when it's the same size. It's just a little minor variation, or having French doors instead of some other kind of opening. Things that are pretty just things you wouldn't notice, for example, are really going to come up as ministerial. But if there's been work that hasn't been approved, that is qualifying as a minor or major amendment, we would agree with this suggestion that we should treat it as a major amendment. It brings the item to a hearing, and it's a much more serious matter, and we think it could help folks be a little bit more careful and when these things are moving forward. We can't do this with ADUs. Accessory dwelling units are covered by state law, and design review and a lot of the permitting requirements for them we just have to follow that all the way through. So this wouldn't be applicable to everything. And we would also have to be careful about our workload. I don't think this is going to happen very much, but there could be a case where a planning commission permit, when approved by this body, this occurs, and the director, we might just take that hearing instead of having to come to you with it if we think that in the public interest it would be okay for the director to do so. If we don't, we have of course we would bring it to you, which I've been doing as you've seen. So we like this a lot, and in fact you'll see how much we like it because we're going to propose some amended language to a condition of approval to incorporate this. The next one, I think this is more a call to question of what do you do about emergency permits? And that's a great question. And we thought about it quite a bit, and we're going to suggest that we just monitor it because honestly, emergency CDPs are subject to special findings, and a follow-up coastal development permit is required where revisions can be addressed in the event that they occur. Typically, they would be occurring because maybe, let's think about the Seymour ditch that you saw recently. If the city engineer is out there and he's seeing that the riprap isn't holding or something, that's going to be in real time making some adjustments. It still needs to come back for a follow-up coastal development permit. So that's your backstop on those. So this is our suggestion for that one. And then next one. Oh yeah. So there was a recommendation to add a reference to the guidance document that, as we mentioned, we're going to polish up a bit more. And staff wants to add some things too. We want to double down on the order of operations here, that we get the approval before we do the construction. So we drafted, and it will need polishing, and I apologize for the next slide, which is a long condition, but we were realizing that we kept adding clauses to this thing and it was becoming unreadable. So we've restructured this standard condition for your consideration. The yellow highlights are those topics that are being added to it. The city engineer reference was already something you saw a year ago. We think that's applicable to anything, so we just put that at the end. And you can see in advance of construction, and then according to the staff guidance, and then the minor or major, and then the real clear direction that amendments where construction occurs before approval, they're going to be treated as major changes. And we think that's a really good upfront condition. If we're going to be doing this, we really need to make sure our applicants know what the consequences are. And that's something we're very mindful of. It can be expensive. We are on a cost recovery system, and we have to charge for the time. And that's a city council approved permit cost. So development pays for itself is the concept behind that, and that's what we're required to do. So I'm letting this hang out here so that you have a moment or two to read it. But that's really the end of what we've done so far, things we're thinking about, and more public information to make that available with things on the website, handouts, engagement at our public counter for intake or pre-intake, emphasizing the design guidelines. And I will say it's a lot, and we're very interested in what else you may have for us, but we're going to have to be really careful about how much more we can do. So we want to do the things that are the most effective and meaningful to this commission, and that staff can really make work. We're all about being pragmatic here. And thank you for considering our update.
Before we get to clarifying questions and comments and conversation, for this particular item, this is just enough to update. All we're doing is providing feedback to you, correct? Great, okay.
Correct, but we should take public comment.
All right, very good. I'm going to open this up for public comment. I think I have at least one public comment card from Paul Nagengast. I'll ask him to conform to the 3 minutes this time.
Good evening again, Planning Commission Chair and all of the commissioners, city staff and others. Again, Paul Nagengast, 229 Valdez Avenue. And I want to publicly thank the planning staff for returning to the commission with an update on this item. I provided a letter, it was part of your digital packet, and I've had discussions with planning director on some of the items that I felt were necessary from the past 18 months that I've had firsthand experience of things that work, don't work, definitely don't work, or sort of work, or as my father always taught me, there's always room for improvement. And I think that's something you constantly have to do, because things change, people come and go, staff changes, and it's just hard to reset. So I was going to refer to my letter. Jill brought up that I wish you would consider the items that are on there. I think they're great items. And the only thing I would like to add is that any improvements to amendments to the CDP processes maintains consistency when there are city staff level changes, provides the public assurances of the process with minimal potential for surprises, and provides known expectations when neighbors are not neighborly. Thank you.
Thank you. James Benjamin.
Thank you, James Benjamin, 400 Pilarcitos Avenue. Those were wonderful changes. Thank you to staff and thank you to Paul for talking about those. I only had one additional suggestion. It just comes from my experiences at the Coastal Commission. As you may know, the Coastal Commission gets an avalanche of requests for its decisions. And one of the things they do, similar in some ways to the minor that we're talking about with respect to amendments to projects, is that they have the ability, like you would be delegating to the planning director, they can delegate some of their decisions to the executive director. And if the executive director considers it a de minimis project, they can approve those changes. But they have a safety valve, which is if a small number of commissioners do not agree with the de minimis decision, they can call it up and the project is, the executive director's approval is withdrawn and it goes through a normal process. I think that's, they may not like it or they may love it. I don't know. It would be interesting to know what they think. But I think that at some level, as Jill pointed out, you can't cover every possibility. You can't get that complete and exhaustive in your definition. It just would be too baroque to operate. But having a safety valve like that lets you, the members of the commission, two of you, I don't know what the number would be. It shouldn't be a majority because then you've presumed what the decision's likely to be. But if you have a window to say, wait a minute, hold the phone, stop the music, I want that one to come to us, you'll have a chance to address these concerns and give them the public hearing. And I think that could be a valuable insurance policy that you may wish to consider. Thanks for considering that idea.
Thank you. I don't see anybody I don't see any other green comment cards, and there's only 2 members of the public here at the moment. And I see 3 folks online, but I don't see any hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. So who would like to begin?
I have a question through the chair.
Please.
Is it possible to add a QR code to the site plan that would link directly to the project?
Woo-woo.
If I could defer to Bridget, actually, I think you'd be better equipped to answer this question.
I know a guy. It's really easy.
Well, when it's on the website, I think it is easy, but we have our planning files, so I don't know if we could post them on our web and then make a link to that. We don't have anything connected, so we could look into.
We don't need to prosecute
Yeah,
it here.
We could look into it.
I think we're not there yet because of the permit system we're using, but once we have more online presence, I think that would be perfectly fine to do.
Steve?
Thank you, Chair Hernandez. I don't have much to add. I applaud our City Hall staff team for the initiative in this. I think it's a terrific example of when the team that does the work day in and day out uses that everyday insight to think about process improvements. It's always a winning scenario. I'd say the only my words of advice would be inspired by your onboarding of the building inspector to write it all down and have a systematic training for new employees. And secondly, be careful about how much new stuff you sign up for. You know, there's always you can agree to do this one thing and then for the rest of eternity you're stuck with that responsibility. So be careful about overcommitting and be careful about doing the really important things as best we can. Thanks.
Could I just say, I love the idea of the pre-concrete visit. Excellent. And the city engineer reviewing anything that has to do with impervious surfaces. Those really stand out as like trying to reach the problem before it becomes a problem. That's great. It's going to save so much time. It's like, it seems like it's a lot more time invested, but it's going to end up, I think, saving time. So those are wonderful. I also really like just the responsiveness to, the concerns that have been raised. And, there's two ways to approach it, right? You can either, hunker down and go about business the way you've been going about business, or look at it and try to figure out something else. And this has been great. So my one concern, and maybe Jimmy Benjamin answered this, but this follow-up on an emergency CDP, I'm a little concerned that if all the city council or planning commissioners doing is following up on an emergency CDP, we could be left with a choice basically between two evils, like trying to, take down a wall that's been built or take down a foundation that's been poured. So I don't know how to fix that. I just wanted to raise it as that's, and maybe Jimmy Benjamin's idea would answer that. That's all I got. Thanks.
Commissioner Joyce?
I have a couple of, maybe a little bit more than a couple of items. I just was wondering, with ministerial and minor modifications that the planning director or staff can make, sometimes projects will come in and have several small ministerial types of items that come in, it gets approved, and then something that's minor comes in, it gets approved, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of these piecemeal approvals that in the end the project is not what it's originally intended. And how many of these ministerial and minors become now a major? What is in place at the city staff level to signal to them that these minor modifications and ministerial modifications are cumulative and become big. So I was just hoping that maybe we could incorporate some kind of checks and balances within the staff's procedures and processes to check on that, because sometimes these scope creeps can add up. And then I was happy to hear that, so my understanding is somebody can come in, an applicant can come in with many modifications to a CDP. And it takes a lot of staff time. Is there a limitation on how many times something can get amended? And, I don't think we can limit that. I don't know, but I'm hoping that the city does recover all its costs, because it's expensive on the city staff level. So I don't know how the city tracks that. Is there a financial management system that tracks that? And, how many hours? So it's just the cost thing, because it takes a lot of time on city staff, sometimes the city attorney's costs. Just wondering if that is something we can put into place there. As far as consequences for after-the-fact approvals, I know you mentioned it would be made very clear what those consequences are, but I'm not really sure what those consequences are, right? Is it a fine? Is it, how long does it take for somebody to bring something back into compliance? Is there a deadline or a time limitation, something to address that so people understand what those consequences are? Whether it's a lien on a property, I don't know it. What rises to the level of, hey, I'm never going to bring my property up to compliance, so now what? City, tell me what happens next. I don't know the answers to that. With regard to the design guidelines, I appreciate that they're not prescriptive, but I'm wondering how they gel with SB, was it 167? And are we supposed to have more objective criteria so that people understand what those guidelines are? So I was just wanting to see how we are aligning the design guidelines to the objective criteria that's needed by SB 167. I think it's 167. Well, anyway, it's one of the items. I think it's 167. I don't know. As far as, I like the idea of the disqualification of a project coming in as a minor if they are getting after-the-fact approvals. But is that the same as having a code violation, a code enforcement violation? Shouldn't those two go hand in hand? If it's either code enforcement action or a CDP violation, suggesting maybe that those two need to be married up. And then the issue of nonconformance on a project. You have a project that has, it's an addition, let's just say, or it's, kitchen remodel, but somehow it has experienced some kind of a violation. I know that the city bifurcates the part that's in non-compliance. Let's just say you have a living room extension and you have a kitchen extension, and the living room is not in compliance with the CDP, but you are allowing, it's on one permit, it's on one CDP, but we're allowing now the person to work on the kitchen side, but not on the non-conforming side. So I'm wondering, is that a normal practice, or, and why do we bifurcate these permits and, CDPs? Let's see. I like the idea of having a staff's standard operating procedure, guideline, whatever that is, so that, the historical knowledge can be conveyed to new staff, training can happen, and this is more of a process that's continued. And if it needs to be changed, it'll get changed in the future, but at least the information, the download information from staff member to a new staff member is carried on. One thing about ADUs, I noticed that online, the ADUs, there's two products, so documents that are online. One is, I think, a one-pager, a fact sheet, and the other is a pamphlet or booklet on ADUs. And on one of it, I noticed that the guidelines say the setbacks can be a certain distance from the side or the back yard setbacks. And on the, I think on the larger document, it says that the setbacks can be much less. It can go up to 4 feet versus, and so I'm wondering if it's an issue or a constraint put on a builder's and their, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, is it necessary for a builder to opt into the state's guideline, or is it an automatic that they get that setback? So I wasn't sure if it was, hey, I want to opt into the state, or, you know, the one guideline that's out there that's different. So those two are not correlating together at all. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Answer that one real quick.
Thank you for bringing this item before us.
Can we go through some of those responses now while they're fresh in our heads and then keep going? Is that okay?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for interrupting you. I'm going to go backwards. The ADU packet and the handout, Scott and I are speculating that the handout is an artifact of our old code and it needs to be replaced, and we have an updated handout, so thank you for catching that. Those 4-foot setbacks are required by state law, and they are in your ADU ordinance in the zoning code, so we will go clean up our shop there, so thanks.
Good catch.
Yeah, very good. The matter of conformance and allowing some construction on some projects, I had a long discussion with our building official about this, and I know this isn't the nicest thing to share with you, but it really is a case-by-case situation. There may be a situation like one I'm thinking of that you and I worked on where the house was not occupied. It was really taken down to the studs, and we had an issue, and we red tagged it, the whole thing, because it made sense to do so. There was enough work that needed to be reassessed on enough sides of the house that we were very comfortable doing that, and the contractor and the property owner didn't have a problem with it. They completely understood, and then they brought it into compliance. Sometimes we have a house that's occupied, and you know, we try to accommodate people are living through their construction projects, and it's rough. So just note that, and we're trying to be reasonable. And so your building official has seen it all, and I think he has excellent judgment about this. And so I'm really giving you that answer of it depends. Okay. The after the fact approvals versus, well, I guess is it code enforcement or is it a project that needs a CDP? It's kind of both. And the enforcement may be to go get the CDP. And then it has to do really with willingness and the timelines that are involved. If we have someone who is coming forward to correct it through a CDP, we're a little less in the code enforcement side, and we're trying to bring them along into the permit side. It goes the other way sometimes, and so then they get, we have citations, and that can build up over time. So we try to be consistent with that. Again, it is difficult. There are a lot of situations out there. Let's see.
I'd also like to add that we do have the ability to double charge fees, and occasionally, if someone's in violation, it does rise to that level. A lot of times, if people willingly submit and there isn't any issue, then no, we don't necessarily double charge. But if someone consistently doesn't do, what we're suggesting they do and provide what we need, then yes, we do, and continue to do non-permitted work, then we're going to double charge them. So.
And thank you, Scott. That's right. State housing law with respect to objective design standards is a very important topic, and we, Winter wants to make a note about that, yes.
There's an update to the residential design guide coming at some point, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say at a high level that, as we all know, state housing law has gotten more and more focused on limiting local government's authority to impose anything other than objective design guidelines. The coastal zone has been kind of kept out of that largely in the, last since this all sort of started. We're starting to see that change. There was just an extension of SB 35, which was kind of the original Wiener streamlining bill, in case anyone's been paying attention to any of this, into the coastal zone in sort of a qualified manner. So I think we haven't had to think about it as much as other jurisdictions so far because of being entirely within the coastal zone, but it is, I'm sure, something that's coming our way in the near future.
So I think that was most of your questions, and we do have a system where staff logs time, and it's something that all of the planners need to do, and the city engineer as well. Some of us are overhead. I am our administrative assistant, so our billing rates are set up to cover that. And our administrative services director is actually overseeing an update to our cost recovery. So we're going to be working on updating our rates. This is something that almost all cities have a system like this, and they need to be updated every typically 5 years, and it's been a while since we've done ours.
Well, thank you for jumping in. I think I just want to step back from a big picture perspective. 18 years ago, we made the decision to go through the design process to build a house here. And the only member of city staff who is present is actually sitting in the audience, and he can probably attest to how murky the whole process was from a planning, permitting, architectural review perspective, and we've made a lot of progress from that point. And I think there's still some improvement to be made, but certainly we're in a much better place now than we were 18 years ago. I can objectively say that. I think part of our reason for being up on this dais is because we're here to serve the public. And so, again, big picture, I think it'd be helpful, if we don't already have this, to put in place a survey system for people who go through this process. Maybe even survey before they start construction and after they complete their projects. I found both customer satisfaction and net promoter score to be examples of benchmarks that net promoter score in particular, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is something that can really help you understand whether or not people think you're doing them right. And there's a lot of literature about that. I don't know about literature for it in the public sector, but I do know about it in the private sector because I've used it many times. Big fan of, tightening up the residential design guidelines to conform with state law. Obviously, we need to start looking at that. And that's for ADUs, obviously, is where we really need to be thinking about that. And also for some of the new home construction, I'm sure you guys are going to get on that. I do think that what we have right now are, as the document says, recommendations. They don't cover every situation. As we evolve this document, I mean, I can think of at least half a dozen projects that have been approved since we adopted the residential design guidelines that have specific things that we say don't do, but they look awesome. And it's part of the architectural review process is to give leniency in situations where it makes sense. So as we think about, well, are we going to have a de minimis approval at the planning director's decision? Are we going to be able to pull things that we want to have review on? I think these are all nice improvements. My big picture thing, though, is if you're going to update the residential design guidelines, make sure you continue that spirit of, look, sometimes architectural design doesn't fit into a black box, and we need to have a way to let people come up with creative solutions that doesn't necessarily require variance or coming to the Planning Commission. So just think about how you're going to incorporate that. The other thing that I think is important is, I heard the phrase development needs to pay for itself. I heard we have situations where we may double charge people if, in staff's opinion, they're abusing the system. I think it's really important that, and also I heard city staff wanting to sign up for a bunch of things. So I just want to be careful about us not going down a path where we're bloating development staff. There's always a balance that needs to be struck. And so I'm just asking us to be mindful of striking that balance and be really mindful about due process. We want to make sure that if we do have something where we're double charging somebody, you've got clearly defined SOPs. You can't just be doing this willy-nilly. I've certainly been subject to that many years ago when I went through design, and so I'm very sensitive to it. Yeah, and we've been blessed to have Jill and some of the new staff who've come on board who proactively bring things to the Planning Commission. I think it'd be good to have some SOPs documented around what are examples of things that should be brought forth, and because staff change. And we want to keep building on the goodness that we've got here, and we may have somebody who takes a more aggressive posture with what the city can and can't do without Planning Commission oversight. I like the changes to impervious surfaces being something that the city engineer should look at. It'd be great to look at the city code more longer term, not just for new projects with respect to impervious surfaces, because once your project's approved, there's very little to stop you, I think, from just pouring concrete on your entire yard, as many of my neighbors who've been here a long time have done. Yeah, I think that we're making progress. So just please, and also very much support the after the project change. Just want to clearly state that, like if somebody makes a change that's been approved that no longer is minor, it's major by definition and needs to come for review. I'm a really strong supporter of that. So that's all I have. Are there any other feedback or comments? Commissioner Gossett, Vice
Just
Chair
a couple
Gossett.
comments. I wanted to say I've noticed on some site drawings that you've provided the visual drawings for projects, so I appreciated seeing that because I think that helps people understand what may be coming. I noticed on one site posting that an ADU was going to be deed restricted for 55 years, and so I thought that was a very good idea to put that on the posting, that the ADU would be deed restricted for low-income housing. The only concern I have is about neighbors being pitted against each other via requiring that they provide city staff with evidence of violations in order for the city to issue citations or to enforce code beyond even CDP violations. So I'm just a little concerned about sometimes that going on. And maybe that's actually a little bit outside of CDP violations, but it does have to do with code enforcement. Thank you.
I had two other points that I failed to hit. Just to clarify, I'd like us to come up with a policy to pull a project, maybe either AAC, a member of the AAC, or a policy. We're not going to, I don't want to litigate it here, but just like to have something if it's the chair of the AAC or two members want to pull it. Similarly for the Planning Commission, if the chair or two members, something like that, want to pull a project, I think we should have some discretion to do that, and it should be lightweight, but we don't need to litigate it here. Also, I don't know if you do this today, but if you're going to be going about visiting sites and looking at projects, you might want to take a photo and have a standard for taking photos, and you record them with the project. So as you get through these points, you can go back and say, well, this is what it looked like, this is what it looks like now. It's hard to describe changes if you don't have photographic proof of it. So that'd be my suggestion. Great work, guys. Thank you. I think we're done with this matter. Unless anybody has anything else, or Jill, do you have anything you want to respond to in terms of the conversation?
Great. We appreciate the feedback. We'll do our best to do as much of this as possible, and we will continue to update you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, we're going to close this item, and we are going to move on to the director's report.
All right. Hold on to your hats. November 28th, your meeting is canceled.
Woo-hoo.
We are we are just slogged, so we need a little break. And we also have, I think, a pretty big project that Scott's trying to get ready for you, and it just isn't ready. So we don't want to bring it early. We're hoping to bring it to you in December. One thing I like to share is that there's been some training going on City Hall wide. We've had writing class recently, and we're actually doing some follow-up just in our department, because our department is one of the ones that does so much writing. And so we're going to try to have a little bit of fun with that and give us feedback maybe in about 2 months. Give us a little time. We love to make our reports accessible to the public. We want them to include everything you need to make good decisions, and we want to have good writing. So we're going to work on that. And then the most important thing of all is we are thankful for you, and we wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Jill. And I can attest that the quality of staff reports has improved substantially in the last 10 years. Okay, do we have any other Planning Commission communications? So we are currently on for December 12th as the, okay, great. Is the next meeting for the Planning Commission? I hear yes from the right, I hear conversation.
It's a strong, yeah. If your project isn't ready, I think we have some other items. So,
okay.
Yeah, plan for that one.
Great. Okay. All right. With that, I would like to also say we are very thankful and grateful for our city staff and our public who are participating in these meetings, and our translator in the back, Victor, and everybody else from our team here who makes this possible. I'm talking to you guys from Key Club and AV over there. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting's over. Thank you.